to get started now.
All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Tina Cox, and I am the chief of the Proposition 65 implementation program here at the California's Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, also known as OEHHA. To begin today's training, I would like to introduce OEHHA's Deputy Director for External and Legislative Affairs, Amy Gilson. In Amy's role, she oversees the Proposition 65 program, and she has served in this role since 2022. So with that, I will go ahead and hand it over to Amy to get us started.
Hi, good morning, or depending on where you're joining us from, good afternoon or good evening. Welcome to all of you, and thank you very much for joining today's webinar on how to comply with Prop 65. This is our second iteration of this training. Our first was on July 22nd, and we had over 300 people attend that webinar. Today, we have over 650 people registered, representing businesses across industries from food and beauty to consumer electronics, as well as trade associations, law firms, nonprofits, and other public agencies. Again, I'd like to thank you all for participating in what I hope is part of an ongoing dialogue. Prop 65 is part of what makes California a leader in protecting public health and the environment. It was passed by voters who wanted to be able to make informed decisions about their chemical exposures. And without banning a single chemical, the law has helped reduce the use of listed chemicals and exposures to them, not just in California, but nationwide. At the same time, we know Prop 65 compliance can be challenging for businesses juggling a lot with limited resources, especially small businesses. We're doing more outreach to support businesses with compliance assistance. Over the past year, the Prop 65 implementation team, which provides guidance to businesses and consumers, expanded to include an ombudsperson, Julia Doloff, who's giving today's presentation, updated compliance guidance for businesses on our website, shortened response times for businesses who contact our help desk, and produce this training. Some of you may have already been in contact with our team by phone or email, and we're glad you're tuning in today as well. Our goal for today is to give you clear, practical information so you can understand what Prop 65 requires and how to comply, whether that means providing a warning or avoiding the need to warn altogether. During the training, Julia will present an overview of Prop 65, who's required to provide warnings, and how and when to provide them. She'll also cover recent updates to the Prop 65 regulations. We hope this training makes Prop 65 easier to understand and gives you the tools to move forward with confidence. I'll now hand it over to Julia to start the presentation.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you, Tina. So hello, everyone, and thank you all again for joining us today. Before we begin the training, we would like to go over a legal disclaimer. So please note that OEHHA provides guidance on Proposition 65 compliance for the convenience of the public. This guidance is not binding, does not have the force of law, and OEHHA does not enforce Proposition 65. This does not supersede applicable statutes and regulations. This presentation provides information and educational materials as a public service, but these materials may not apply directly to you. OEHHA does not provide legal advice to the public. You may want to consult with an attorney if you have specific legal questions. Finally, this webinar is created by OEHHA and should not be recorded, transcribed, reproduced, or transmitted. OEHHA does not give permission for any uses of this material. So before we dive into today's training, I would like to acknowledge the rest of the Proposition 65 implementation team whose members are helping me out today. So you've already met Tina and Amy. We also have Esther Barajas, who is an analyst with our program and who is helping moderate the Q&A session. And we also have Allison Lensing, who is an executive assistant. She will also be moderating the Q&A session and will launch some polls throughout today's webinar. This slide provides an overview of today's training. However, before we get started, we would like to get an idea of who is in the virtual room with us with a couple of poll questions. We will be launching 5 polls throughout today's training that I hope you will all participate in. Please note that the poll submissions are anonymous. We highly encourage taking the polls, as the responses will be used to guide our development of future trainings and resources. So let's launch our first poll. Who is in the room with us today? Please let us know who you are here representing, and you can select more than one. We are also wondering where you're joining us from, and if your business employs 10 or more people. So we'll give it just a couple of moments to make sure everyone has a chance to respond, and then we will share out the results with you all. We still have a couple polls coming in, and our participation is starting off really strong, so thank you so much for participating. Okay, I think we can share out the results of the poll now. All right, so it looks like we have about 66% of you attending who are manufacturers, and then we've got a little bit of everyone else, retailers, importers, distributors, etc. We have a lot of you joining from California, a lot from the Midwest and the East Coast, and from a lot of other places as well. And then it looks like most of you have 10 or more employees. All right, well, thank you so much for taking that poll today. So today's presentation aims to provide an overview of business responsibilities, increase business understanding of how to comply with Proposition 65 and avoid potential enforcement action, identify helpful resources for businesses, and guide the development of additional trainings and resources. At the end of the presentation, we will have a short question and answer session. If you have a question you would like answered, you can type it into the Q&A box at any time. We do ask that your questions be general and not include identifiable information about a brand or a specific product. We will focus on questions that help clarify the requirements of Proposition 65 and how to comply. The questions that are asked today will also help guide the development of future resources for businesses, so for all of you. And please note that we will likely not be able to answer every single question today. If we are not able to answer your questions today, we will try and follow up with you after the webinar. If you have entered the webinar as an anonymous participant, please note that your email address is not automatically captured with your question at the end of the webinar. So if you are an anonymous participant and you want us to follow up with your question, you must either add your email address to the end of your question when you drop it into the Q&A, or you must email your question to our team's email inbox. And you can see that on the slide, and we will provide it again. So let's start off with an overview of Proposition 65 and the law's requirements. As many of you already know, Proposition 65 became law in November 1986 when it was approved by California voters. Proposition 65 requires California to update and maintain the list of chemicals known to cause cancer, birth defects, or other reproductive harm. The law requires businesses to provide warnings to Californians for significant exposures to listed chemicals. The law also prohibits California businesses from knowingly discharging significant amounts of listed chemicals into sources of drinking water. OEHHA is the lead agency for the implementation of Proposition 65. Part of our statutory requirements include maintaining and updating the chemical list. We also develop regulations related to the warning content and safe harbor levels. We provide compliance assistance to businesses and information about the warnings to consumers. Proposition 65 is enforced by the California Attorney General's Office, district attorneys, city attorneys of major cities, and by any person or entity in the public interest. The Attorney General's Office adopted their own regulations that contain private enforcement reporting requirements and settlement guidelines. As mentioned, Californians approved Proposition 65 in the interest of public health and safety. The law helps reduce Californians' exposure to listed chemicals by incentivizing businesses to reformulate their products, to remove listed chemicals, and thereby forego the need to provide a warning. The warning requirements allow Californians to make more informed choices regarding the items they purchase or the places they visit. Several recently published studies by external research groups have been able to help confirm the law's impact on the health of Californians. Recently, we launched a new webpage to better acknowledge and explain how Proposition 65 benefits Californians. Let's look at what the law states. Proposition 65 requires businesses to provide clear and reasonable warnings to individuals in California before exposing them to significant amounts of a listed chemical. Before we get into the requirements for businesses, I would like to note that businesses with fewer than 10 employees are exempt from Proposition 65 by law. However, it is very important to understand that a small business may have contractual obligations to those they sell to that could include indemnification agreements or agreements to comply with all California laws. For example, small businesses may be asked by distributors and retailers to disclose any listed chemicals in their products. Businesses should consult with their legal counsel concerning their potential for liability where the law does or does not apply to them directly. So I've just given a high-level overview of the overarching requirements of Proposition 65. Now I'm going to talk about safe harbor levels and significant risk and how these concepts relate to the warning requirements. Statute and regulations specify what a significant risk of exposure is for carcinogens and reproductive toxicants. This is important as statute provides an exemption from the warning requirements if exposure to a chemical listed for cancer poses no significant risk, assuming lifetime exposure, and if exposure to a reproductive toxicant will have no observable effect. OEHHA develops regulatory safe harbor levels for certain chemicals as resources within our office allow and as available information and data permit. Safe harbor levels include no significant risk levels, or NSRLs, for cancer-causing chemicals, and maximum allowable dose levels, or MADLs, for chemicals causing reproductive toxicity. Safe harbor levels are intake levels expressed in units of micrograms of chemical exposure per day. Exposure levels to listed chemicals that are at or below safe harbor levels are exempt from the warning requirements. Businesses can use safe harbor levels to determine whether their product needs a warning and as a target for reformulating their products. For example, lead is one of our oldest safe harbor levels and one of the most influential, as it has guided efforts to remove lead from a vast range of products. Businesses can also develop their own defense safe harbor levels in the case in which OEHHA has not developed one, and they may also do so in cases when OEHHA has adopted a regulatory safe harbor level. The regulations provide guidance on how to perform a quantitative assessment to derive a safe harbor level. A business would need to defend its safe harbor level if challenged by an enforcer in the course of litigation. If a safe harbor level identifies a route of exposure, the NSRL or the MADL is for that route of exposure only. Routes of exposure include inhalation, dermal absorption, ingestion, or accidental ingestion. For example, the photo on the slide shows the safe harbor levels for lead. The NSRL for lead identifies that it is for the oral route of exposure only. If no route of exposure is identified, the safe harbor level is for all routes of exposure. The lead MADL does not identify a route of exposure. Therefore, the MADL is for all routes of exposure. If there is an NSRL and a MADL for a listed chemical, both levels apply. OEHHA is always developing new MADLs and NSRLs. To get updates on the development of new safe harbor levels, make sure you sign up for the Proposition 65 listserv. And I'm sure many of you here today are already subscribed. Now I will briefly discuss the types of exposure warnings that are outlined in the regulations. The regulations define 3 types of exposures and outline guidance for providing a clear and reasonable warning for each type of exposure. These are occupational, environmental, and consumer product exposure warnings. I will briefly touch on the regulatory requirements for providing a clear and reasonable warning for occupational and environmental exposures. However, I will focus mainly on consumer product exposure warnings throughout the remainder of this presentation. But before we continue, we do have a second poll question for you. So we will launch that now. So please let us know which types of warnings your company or business that you are here representing today primarily provides. And for this poll question, you may submit more than one. So please check all that apply. All right. I think we've got most of the results. So thank you for taking this poll. So it looks like 75% of you provide consumer product exposure warnings, about 23% provide occupational, 18% provide environmental, and 11% provide none. So thank you for taking the time to complete that poll. So the regulations define an occupational exposure as an exposure to any employee at their place of employment. Our regulations state that a business can comply with the Proposition 65 when the specific chemical exposure is covered by either the California or the Federal Hazard Communication Standard. If there is an occupational exposure to a listed chemical and no warning is being given for that exposure under the Hazard Communication Standard, then a Proposition 65 warning may still be required. The regulations define an environmental exposure as an exposure that occurs as the result of contact with an environmental source through inhalation, ingestion, or skin or other contact with the body. All exposures that are not consumer product exposures or occupational exposures are environmental exposures. The regulations outline multiple ways to provide a warning for an environmental exposure. Lastly, the regulations define a consumer product as any article or component part thereof, including food, that is produced, distributed, or sold for the personal use, consumption, or enjoyment of a consumer. Now we know more about the types of exposures a business might have to warn for. Now let's understand who is responsible for providing a warning. OEHHA's regulations place primary responsibility for providing warnings on product manufacturers, producers, packagers, importers, suppliers, or distributors. However, all businesses in the chain of commerce should take appropriate actions to ensure that the warnings or warning materials are passed along to the retail sellers and ultimately to the consumers. How that is done will vary. For example, manufacturers or producers may choose to enter into a contract with other businesses in the chain of commerce for their products, or contract with the retail sellers directly to ensure the warnings are ultimately provided to consumers. In some cases, retailers are required to provide a warning. The regulations specify certain situations in which a retailer is responsible for providing a warning, which includes the following circumstances. When the retailer is selling a product under a brand or trademark that is owned or licensed by the retail seller or an affiliated entity, if the retailer has knowingly introduced a listed chemical into the product, or knowingly caused a listed chemical to be created in the product, if the retailer has covered, obscured, altered a warning label that has been affixed to the product, when the retailer has received a notice and warning materials and the retail seller has sold the product without conspicuously posting or displaying the warning, and when the retailer has actual knowledge, such as through a 60-day notice, of the exposure, and there is no responsible manufacturer, producer, packager, importer, supplier, or distributor of the product that can be identified. Now we know who is responsible for providing a warning. Let's discuss how a business can determine whether a warning is required. Businesses must determine whether their products will expose people to listed chemicals and if the exposure is at a high enough level to require a warning. Recall that safe harbor levels can be used to determine whether a warning is required for specific chemicals. To ascertain this, businesses usually draw on knowledge of their own business operations, supply chains, and the chemicals used to make their products. A business may choose to perform testing or conduct an exposure assessment to help determine whether a warning is needed. However, product testing is not required. It is important to note that businesses should consider any reasonably foreseeable use of a consumer product when determining if there is a significant exposure and if a warning is required. For instance, a business that sells wood furniture would not need to warn for wood dust because the average user will not significantly be exposed to wood dust when using a finished furniture product. A consumer product exposure warning is not required in the following circumstances. If a product contains a listed chemical, but a person using the product would not actually be exposed to that chemical. If a product contains a listed chemical, but the exposure is at or below the safe harbor level established for that chemical. If a product contains a chemical for which no safe harbor level has been established, the business can show that the exposure level does not pose a significant risk of cancer or reproductive harm to consumers. So, how can businesses avoid the need to provide a warning? Reformulate. The warning requirement is intended to provide an incentive for product reformulations. We suggest businesses look for environmentally friendly substitutions to listed chemicals. Businesses should view the warning as a last resort. Know your product's chemical content, take full advantage of safe harbor levels, assess exposures from your product, and consult OEHHA's regulations for methods of detection and analysis that can be used as a defense to enforcement action. Let's go over what we have learned so far regarding how a business can determine whether a warning is required for a consumer product. The first thing to know is that while the Proposition 65 list includes hundreds of chemicals, most chemicals are not present in consumer products. When considering whether a product requires the warning, assess your product. Questions to consider when assessing your product include: is there a listed chemical likely to be in the product? Which chemical? Does testing show it is present? How is the product used? How might exposure to the listed chemical occur? Is the chemical released into the air or dust? Does the chemical migrate out of the product? What are the effects of heat, UV exposure, or other environmental factors on the release of that chemical from the product? In answering these questions, consider using the following information: your understanding of the manufacturing process and the content of the raw materials used, safety data sheets, Proposition 65 statements from suppliers, supplier test results, and understand common environmental contaminants from soil, air, and water. If you have determined that it is likely there is a listed chemical in your product and exposure is likely, conduct an exposure assessment. Pick your lab carefully for quality controls and quality lab reports, data validation, and specific methods for your product and the listed chemical. Exposure assessments need to factor in pathways and routes of exposure. For example, inhalation, dermal absorption, ingestion, or accidental ingestion. Use your own data or government surveys on use or consumption of the product. It is important to understand that exposures are estimated for the average user of the product and calculated as the sum of all pathways and routes, and expressed as intake per day. After conducting an exposure assessment, compare the exposure with the safe harbor level if there is one. If the exposure is at or below the safe harbor level, no warning is needed. If you determine a warning is required, determine the best method to provide the warning and the warning content. We will cover this next. Now we understand how to determine whether a warning is required. Let's get into how to provide a warning if a business does indeed determine they need to provide a warning. As we have covered, the law requires businesses to provide a clear and reasonable warning before exposing individuals in California to significant amounts of a listed chemical. Our office developed regulations that provide guidance on how businesses can provide a clear and reasonable warning. These are called safe harbor warnings, which provide safe harbor protection to businesses. This means that businesses that provide warnings that follow the regulatory guidance should have protection from potential enforcement action. Businesses can provide warnings that deviate from the regulations, but they will not be able to use compliance with the regulations as a defense to an enforcement action. The types of safe harbor warnings provided in the regulations are the full-length warning, which requires that at least one chemical be named per endpoint, the short-form warning, which now requires the chemical name be included, and we will cover this later in the presentation, and tailored warnings, which are developed for specific products or places, such as food and cannabis products. To provide a warning for consumer product exposures, businesses must either provide a warning on the product label or labeling, or provide a written notice directly to the authorized agent for the business to which they are selling or transferring the product, or to the authorized agent for the retail seller who is subject to Proposition 65. Retail sellers are responsible for placing and maintaining the warning materials they receive from product manufacturers, producers, packagers, importers, suppliers, or distributors. For example, for auto parts, the manufacturer would include the shelf sign with the tailored warning content for auto parts to the retailer. The retailer would then post the shelf sign. Most businesses opt to provide warnings directly on their products as opposed to providing a written notice. The Proposition 65 regulations outline several methods for providing a safe harbor warning. These include the following. A product-specific warning may be provided on a posted sign, shelf tag, or shelf sign at each point of display of the consumer product. A warning may be provided on the label. The regulations define a label as a display of written, printed, or graphic material that is printed on or affixed to a product or its immediate container or wrapper. A product-specific warning may be provided using an electronic device that automatically provides the warning before purchase, but note that this option pertains to in-person purchases. And a short-form warning on the label may be provided, but that cannot be smaller than size 6-point font. The warning must be prominently displayed and likely to be seen, read, and understood by an ordinary individual under customary conditions of purchase or use. We receive a lot of questions regarding the placement of the warning. Here are a few things to take note of. The warning label should be placed to ensure that consumers see the warning prior to purchase. For example, providing a warning in an instruction operation or owner's manual by itself is not a safe harbor warning. A photo of a warning in a manual is shown in the photo on the top right-hand corner of the slide. A warning provided on a shelf sign must be product-specific. The photo shown on the left-hand side of the slide is not product-specific, and is therefore not a safe harbor warning. A warning cannot be a generic warning for a material type, like the photo shown in the bottom right-hand corner. This even has a made-up URL. A QR code may not be used in place of a safe harbor warning. Some other important things to consider when providing a warning. A warning must be visible on exterior packaging if the exposure can occur when the consumer opens the package. A general warning placed at public entrances to cover all possible exposures that may occur at the business is not a safe harbor warning. A warning must now list a chemical name. However, there is a phase-in period for the new short-form warning, which we will discuss later this morning. And just to reiterate, none of the warnings shown on the slide are safe harbor warnings. This slide outlines what must be included in a warning to have safe harbor protection. Most warnings, unless otherwise specified, require the inclusion of the warning symbol. The warning symbol must be printed in yellow, unless, for instance, the color yellow is not used on the product packaging, in which case the symbol may be in black and white. A signal word or phrase must also be used. These include warning, CA warning, or California warning in bold text. A warning must name one or more of the listed chemicals in the consumer product or affected area. Where a warning is being provided for more than one endpoint, endpoints are cancer and reproductive toxicity, the warning must include the name of one or more chemicals for each endpoint, unless the named chemical is listed for both cancer and reproductive toxicity. The regulations outline several options for warning content. For safe harbor protection, the content must be used as specified in the regulations. The warning content may contain information that is supplemental to the extent that it identifies the source of the exposure or provides information on how to avoid or reduce exposure to the identified chemical or chemicals. Our business resources webpage provides sample compliant safe harbor warnings and translations. I will do a walkthrough of how to navigate the website later. Safe harbor warnings for food product exposures do not require the warning symbol. However, when the warning is provided on the food product label, it must be set off from other surrounding information and enclosed in a box. The photo on the slide shows an example of this. Our office has established tailored warnings for use on many specified products and for specific environmental exposures. Where there is a tailored warning for a product, the tailored warning should be used so the business has safe harbor protection unless the regulations specify otherwise. Warnings must be provided for products sold over the internet within or into California to have safe harbor protection. The regulations specify several ways to provide an internet warning, such as by providing a warning on the product display page, or by providing a clearly marked hyperlink using a signal word, such as the word warning, on the product display page that links to the warning text. Both methods are displayed on the slide. The photo at the top shows a signal word and a hyperlink, which following the arrow then leads to the full warning text. Internet warnings must be prominently displayed to the purchaser prior to completing the purchase. A warning is not prominently displayed if the purchaser must search for it in the general content of the website. A warning must also be provided on or with the product itself. Warnings must be provided in catalogs in a manner that clearly associates the warning with the item being purchased. A warning must also be provided on or with the product. If a sign, labeling, or label used to provide a warning includes consumer information about a product in a non-English language, the warning must also be provided in that language. Consumer information includes warnings, directions for use, ingredient lists, and nutritional information. consumer information does not include the brand name, product name, company name, location of manufacture, or product advertising. Please note that some tailored warnings may have their own requirements for providing translated warnings. This is true, for example, for service stations and vehicle repair facilities. Our business resources webpage provides sample safe harbor warnings in Spanish, French, Cambodian, simplified and traditional Chinese, Hmong, Japanese, Korean, Tagalog, Thai, and Vietnamese. I will go over where to find this page later. So that completes my overview of business requirements for how to provide a warning. Now I will cover some regulatory updates. As most of you may be aware, OEHHA adopted updated regulations regarding use of the short form warning. The new regulations took effect on January 1st, 2025. The updated regulations state that a short form warning on a product manufactured on or after January 1st, 2028 must include at least one chemical for each endpoint to be considered a safe harbor warning. Businesses can certainly begin using the updated short form warning prior to 2028. For instance, if a business is redoing their product packaging, that is a good opportunity to also update the warning for that product. A short form warning on a product manufactured and labeled prior to January 1, 2028 may use the old content regardless of when the product is sold to a consumer. The regulations also include a new short form warning that may be used for food products. Our business resources website provides sample safe harbor warnings for the new short form warnings, including the new short form warning for food products. New tailored warnings for passenger or off-highway motor vehicle parts and for recreational marine vessel parts were also adopted and became effective on January 1st, 2025. The new tailored warnings provide an optional warning for stores that sell these products to post the tailored warning on a product shelf or in the store as a large sign. Companies are not required to use the new tailored warning content, and products that already have safe harbor warnings do not need to be changed. Additionally, short form warnings may still be used on these products, which is unique to these two new tailored warnings. When using the tailored warning content on a sign, this is the content shown on the slide, the listed chemicals, phthalates and lead, may not be changed. When using any other method, the regulation allows a business to change the chemical references. Now I would like to provide you with some additional regulatory updates that we want to make sure you are aware of. OEHHA added vinyl acetate to the list as a carcinogen through the state's qualified experts mechanism, effective January 3rd, 2025. The warning requirement for significant exposures to vinyl acetate takes effect January 3rd, 2026. OEHHA added the male reproductive toxicity endpoint to the existing listing of bisphenol S, or BPS, through the state's qualified experts mechanism, effective January 3rd, 2025. The warning requirements for the female reproductive endpoint for BPS became effective on December 29, 2024. I also have some program updates that are worth noting. The no significant risk level for titanium dioxide, particles of a respirable size, is effective tomorrow, October 1st. The Developmental and Reproductive Toxicant Identification Committee, or the DART-IC meeting, is scheduled for Thursday, October 9th. The DART-IC meeting will consider listing bisphenol S based on the third reproductive toxicity endpoint, developmental toxicity. This does not affect the warning requirements for BPS, which became effective on December 29, 2024. The comment period for the rulemaking for the proposed safe harbor levels for 1-bromopropane and diethanolamine dermal has been extended until November 7th. The Carcinogen Identification Committee, or the CIC, meeting is scheduled for November 18th. The CIC meeting will consider the listing of N-methyl N-formylhydrazine for cancer. Please see OEHHA's Public Notices webpage for more information if you are interested in watching the DART-IC or the CIC meetings. All right, before we continue, let's see if everyone has been paying attention and if I've made my points clearly by launching our third poll. We hear frequently from consumers that businesses say that they have to put a warning on every product they sell into California. So is this true? Let us know what you think. Yes, no, or maybe you're still not sure. All right, it looks like you've been paying attention. I'm very grateful for that. So the answer is no, a warning is not required on every product sold into California. And give me just a minute here. Okay. So let's reiterate some key points. A warning is only required if there is a significant exposure to a listed chemical, such as an exposure above a safe harbor level. If a product contains a listed chemical, but a person using the product would not actually be exposed to that chemical, no warning is required. And businesses can reformulate their products to remove listed chemicals and forego the need to provide a warning. So very good. Our team answers calls and emails from consumers daily. When businesses put prophylactic warnings on their products or warnings without chemical names, consumers often contact us asking about the warning. We provide general information about what a warning means, but ultimately redirect them to the business that manufactured the item. If they don't get a satisfactory answer and are still confused as to what chemical the warning is for instance, many consumers indicate to us that they end up returning the product. So please, only provide a warning if it is required. Now we are going to go over the answers to our most frequently asked questions from businesses. Question: how should businesses warn for bisphenol S or BPS exposure from receipts and other thermal paper? First, to avoid a warning altogether, we recommend that businesses procure receipt paper, shipping labels, and other thermal paper that don't include BPS or other listed chemicals. This eliminates the need to provide a warning. For instance, we know of several large retailers who have switched to phenol-free paper. These retailers not only procured paper without BPS, but that are free from all phenol-based chemicals. If that is not possible or feasible, a retailer that is providing a warning for its receipts could provide a warning for BPS to consumers on a posted sign, shelf tag, or shelf sign. In this instance, the warning could be located at or near the cash register so that consumers would see it before the potential exposure. In other words, before they take the receipt. To provide a safe harbor warning, the warning must include the name of the chemical individuals are exposed to, so in this case, bisphenol S, and the endpoint, reproductive toxicity. Additionally, employers in California have a general responsibility to identify hazards and take action to protect employees from hazardous exposures. Question: a company manufactures component parts or ingredients that it sells to other manufacturers or producers. How can it comply with the requirements to provide a warning? Answer: if a manufacturer or a supplier of an ingredient or component part knows that the ingredient or component is typically used in a consumer product and could result in an exposure, the manufacturer or supplier should provide the warning notice and materials to the business purchasing the item. The purchasing manufacturer is then responsible for determining whether the final product causes an exposure to the chemical at a level that requires a warning. If they determine a warning is required, that business is responsible for passing the warning along to customers or retail sellers. A company that manufactures component parts or ingredients that include listed chemicals should also consider whether any employees in California may be exposed to listed chemicals in the product and provide occupational warnings as required. We would like to emphasize that for products that may contain listed chemicals within internal components of the product, but that do not cause an exposure during normal use of the product, a warning would not be required. This may be true, for example, for many electronic devices. Question: if a business determines there is an exposure to 5 listed chemicals and a warning is required, must all 5 chemicals be named in the warning? Answer: a business relying on the safe harbor warning content must include the name of 1 or more chemicals for which it is providing a warning. Additionally, the warning must include the name of 1 or more chemicals for each endpoint. The business is free to decide which chemicals to name in the warning. A business can and may choose to identify more listed chemicals, but is not required to do so. Question: is it acceptable to only use chemical abbreviations in a warning? Answer: the full chemical name as it appears on the Proposition 65 list needs to be included in the warning for safe harbor protection. For example, the full chemical name for DEHP should be used in the warning, not just the abbreviation. Question: can a business provide a short form warning instead of a tailored warning? Answer: generally, if there is a tailored warning, a business cannot use the short form warning and still claim safe harbor protection, except where the tailored warning regulation expressly allows the use of the short form warning. Question: what should I do if my business receives a 60-day notice? Answer: as a reminder, OEHHA does not enforce Proposition 65 and cannot provide legal advice. However, there is some guidance we can provide based on what is in the regulations. A retail seller that receives a notice for a consumer product generally has 5 business days after receiving the notice to correct the alleged violation by providing a warning on the product or by discontinuing sale of that product. Certain businesses that receive a notice for specific circumstances have 14 days after receiving the notice to correct the alleged violation and 30 days to pay the civil penalty. For example, this includes an exposure to alcoholic beverages consumed on site and includes an exposure to a chemical in a food or beverage prepared and sold for immediate consumption. Manufacturers do not have a grace period to correct the alleged violation, and settlement or defense is the only option. All businesses should refer to the information in the notice, as well as the Office of the Attorney General and its Frequently Asked Questions webpage for additional information on what to do if you receive a notice. Now that we've gone through the main content, let's do a quick walkthrough of the business section of the warnings website so that you can see how to access our resources. This is a screenshot of the warnings website homepage. To access business resources, click on the For Businesses button at the top of the page. Once you are on the business resources page, you will be able to easily access helpful resources by scrolling down the page. In this screenshot of the Business Resources webpage, we provide links to comprehensive FAQs for businesses, some of which we just covered, resources for compliance assistance and sample warnings, and the Proposition 65 list of chemicals. This is a screenshot of the Compliance Assistance and Sample Warnings webpage. From here, you will have access to the sample safe harbor warnings and translations, which I mentioned several times today. You can access the downloadable warning symbol from this page. We've also developed a guidance document for businesses with less than 10 employees that receive a 60-day notice for a consumer product. We plan to develop more resources for businesses, and we will likely post them on this page. Now let's launch our fourth poll. And this one is very important as your responses will help guide the development of additional business resources. So the questions in this poll that we're hoping you can answer for us include: which additional resources would be helpful for you for us to develop? Which topics would you find helpful for future webinars or guidance materials? And are there any other resources or specific topics you would find helpful for us to develop or cover in the future? And we'll give you a couple of moments for this one, since we do have a write-in and we want to make sure that your voices are heard in this poll. So as you all continue to still fill out this poll, I'll just kind of talk through what I'm looking at right now. It looks like most of you want a little bit of everything. So more webinars, tailored presentations to specific industries, guidance documents, videos, and more FAQs. So a little bit of everything, which is wonderful. And it looks like a lot of you are interested in exposure assessments and safe use determinations. And it does look like we are getting some write-ins for other resources that we may not have thought of. So we'll give it just another moment to allow for some last responses to trickle in. And if for some reason you're not able to fill out a poll quickly enough before we close it, you can always send us an email, with your ideas for resources that you think would be helpful. Okay, it looks like most of our polls are in, so thank you very much, and we will share those results with you all now. Yeah, it looks like you all want a little bit of everything. So again, thank you for taking the poll, and we will absolutely take into consideration all of your answers in this and the other polls. Before we end, we do have one more final poll for you. So we're going to go ahead and launch that now. So if you could please let us know if you found this webinar to be helpful, and provide any feedback that you have for us to improve any future webinars that we may host. That would be very helpful if you could do that for us. Additionally, we want to be able to extend our outreach to businesses. So we are looking for information about any business associations or groups that you get information from about new California laws. We will try and connect with these associations or groups to further our business outreach efforts and to help you all out further. So most of these are writing questions. If you have time and energy still, please do fill those out. If you have thoughts and ideas to share with us, and these, again, will be considered, and we will use those as we develop future tools and further develop our outreach program so that we can expand our efforts to more businesses. So as you're filling out these last poll questions, I would like to thank you all for your time and attention today. We hope this webinar provided helpful information to you. And as a last reminder, this webinar is created by OEHHA and should not be recorded, transcribed, reproduced, or transmitted. OEHHA does not give permission for any uses of this material. We will post a recording of this training soon, and we will send out a listserv message once we have done that. Finally, please contact us if you have suggestions for resources that would be helpful for you, and if you didn't get a chance to let us know today. Again, for any general questions, we advise you to email our Proposition 65 inbox or call our phone line. We do answer the phone. And again, thank you for joining us today. I hope you have a great rest of your day. We will stay online for a few more moments to let you all fill out that poll if you are still completing that. And otherwise, if you're done, thank you so much for joining us. All right, it looks like you're almost done filling out the polls. Okay, we've got some more coming in, so we'll hold off a few more moments. Thank you so much for filling these out. We really appreciate it. Okay, it looks like we have all of our results in. If you are sticking around to see these results, it looks like most of you found it helpful. So that's wonderful. And hopefully, for those of you who thought it was somewhat helpful, you'll give us some feedback on what we can do for you in the future. All right, so with that, we will end the webinar. Thank you again for listening today.